Good morning, evening, or night, wherever you are. Welcome to WHAM today. Take a deep breath, clear your mind, and let's drift through the whispers of today's world, one quiet thought at a time. As we wrap up Tuesday, 22nd July, 2025, let's see what stories are unfolding around us. China is advancing ambitious projects such as the world's largest hydropower dam on the Yaleng-Tsangpo River in Kazang, Tibet, a $167 billion venture that Premier Li Qiang hails as the project of the century, aiming to bring clean energy and development to the region, while also sparking concerns in India. Lenovo Capital is strategically pivoting from foundational AI models to practical AI agent applications, signaling a shift in China's AI strategy. Meanwhile, delays in rocket production are hindering the progress of China's Qianfan broadband network, a Starlink competitor. The nation is also pioneering next-generation high-speed rail technology, with the CR 450 set for commercial trials at 400 km. Further technological prowess is evident in a video showcasing a Chinese tailless drone flying in formation with a turboprop aircraft, demonstrating progress in collaborative combat aircraft. In domestic affairs, a former Tibetan leader is under investigation for corruption and superstitious activities following their dismissal by anti-corruption bodies. Public bus companies are adapting by allowing pet rides and using buses for postal delivery to counteract financial losses. Jiangsu province is closing in on Guangdong for the top provincial GDP spot, fueled by tech-driven growth. Shifting to China-US relations, US President Donald Trump hinted at a potential visit to China amid easing trade tensions, citing a very good relationship. The Trump administration has softened technology controls, possibly influenced by a desire for the president to visit China, leading to reduced influence for China hawks. However, some critics question the U.S. approval of NVIDIA's downgraded H20 AI chip sales to China. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced continued trade talks with Chinese counterparts in Sweden. Turning to China-EU relations, expectations are subdued for the upcoming EU-China 50th anniversary summit in Beijing, with trade friction and China's support for Russia dominating concerns. Despite earlier hopes for improved relations, new tensions have surfaced. China is trying to improve ties with the European Union, partly to leverage divisions between the US and Europe. Chinese firms in Europe are advocating for a substantive deal at the summit, pushing for reduced trade barriers and less political intervention. In other international matters, China is advising its citizens abroad to be cautious about souvenirs, warning that seemingly innocuous items may contain hidden spy functions. China showcased its drone technology in a border control exercise, simulating the seizure and control of critical border locations, while its overall approach to international relations has placed the country on the defensive. Examining economic and business trends in China, international fashion and luxury groups are opening coffee shops in major Chinese cities to attract customers amid a slowdown in luxury spending, with LVMH and Celine recently opening cafes in Shanghai. A Tencent-backed firm is poised to gain control of a non-bank payment license. China is promoting cross-grid power trading as part of its climate and energy initiatives. Following the national team's poor World Cup performance, China's top soccer body plans to form an esports team, reflecting the country's booming esports sector. India. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to London culminated in the signing of a landmark free trade agreement, FTA, with the UK. This FTA is viewed as a significant political and economic achievement amidst global trade tension. Considered Britain's most important post-Brexit trade agreement and India's first major pact outside Asia, the FTA is expected to increase bilateral trade by almost 39%, British industries like cars and whiskey are slated to benefit, while India is expected to receive visa concessions. Discussions also address the presence of Indian fugitives on British soil and the activities of Khalistani activists. Domestically, Vice President Jagdeep Dhankhar resigned, citing health reasons, and received well wishes from Prime Minister Modi. Caste discrimination persists, confining individuals from lower social strata to jobs like cleaning sewers due to historical societal structure. Internationally, India is supporting Bangladesh following an Air Force jet crash in Dhaka, sending a team of doctors to assist. Air India reported no issues after inspections of Boeing fuel switches following the crashed Air India Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner aircraft in Ahmedabad, where the investigation focused on fuel control switches. Trade negotiations between India and the US are deadlocked, particularly concerning agriculture and automotive components, with officials anticipating a possible move from President Trump. United Kingdom. The UK's free trade agreement with India, signed during Prime Minister Modi's visit, marks a significant post-Brexit achievement. This agreement, considered Britain's most important since Brexit and India's first major pact outside Asia, is expected to benefit British industries like cars and whiskey. Prior to the visit, the UK was urged to address the presence of Khalistani activists and Indian fugitives on British soil, issues that were discussed during the visit. A British F-35B fighter jet grounded in India due to a mechanical issue at Thiruvananthapuram International Airport was repaired by a British engineering team and flown back to the UK after being stranded for over a month. United States. The US finds itself at a standstill in trade negotiations with India, especially regarding agriculture and automotive components. Officials anticipate potential unexpected actions from President Donald Trump concerning the deal. Previously, Donald Trump claimed to have prevented a nuclear war between India and Pakistan, stating both were powerful nuclear nations and conflict was imminent. Ireland. In Dublin, an Indian man was injured in what is being described as a racist attack. The Indian ambassador to Ireland, Akhilesh Mishra, expressed shock and questioned the Irish media's coverage of the violent assault on social media. Pakistan. Donald Trump's past claim of preventing a nuclear war between India and Pakistan resurfaced, citing both nations as powerful nuclear entities on the brink of conflict. The specific details surrounding this claim remain unclear. Bangladesh. After an Air Force jet crash in Dhaka, Bangladesh is receiving support from India. A medical team from the Indian Ministry of External Affairs is scheduled to provide assistance. The U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee, USOPC, has barred transgender women from competing in women's sports, citing an obligation to comply with an executive order issued by Donald Trump. Alina Habba, Donald Trump's defense lawyer in a defamation case brought by E. Jean Carroll, was unsuccessful in her bid to become New Jersey's top federal prosecutor. Former President Donald Trump has accused Barack Obama of treason, alleging that Obama tried to engineer a coup by manufacturing evidence of Russian interference following the 2016 election, an accusation Obama's office refuted. The U.S. has also deported 5 men from Vietnam, Jamaica, Laos, Yemen, and Cuba to Eswatini. Switching to Russia, police raided Baza, a popular online media site with 1.5 million Telegram subscribers, as part of a broader crackdown on independent media. The lower house of the Russian parliament approved legislation imposing fines on people searching online for content that the authorities deem extremist. The Kremlin is reviving Soviet-era practices of censorship and prison sentences to suppress dissent. The Ministry of Justice's list of what it deems to be extremist materials stretches to more than 500 pages. Russia and Ukraine are expected to hold another round of negotiations on Wednesday in Istanbul, although both countries have rejected each other's demands. Turning to Ukraine, Russian attacks wounded 24 people prior to planned direct peace talks between the two countries. President Volodymyr Zelensky's announcement of the negotiations has generated little hope for progress in ending the 3-year war. A Ukrainian soldier lost his vision and needed 3 amputations after a Russian drone exploded next to him in October. Russia and Ukraine are expected to hold another round of negotiations on Wednesday in Istanbul, although both countries have rejected each other's demands. In the United Kingdom, a jury found Howard Phillips, 65, guilty of attempting to spy for Russia. Phillips sought to pass information about former Defense Secretary Grant Shapps to 2 men he believed were Russian agents, but who were actually undercover British intelligence agents. Finally, in Eswatini, civil society and opposition groups are outraged after the U.S. deported 5 men from Vietnam, Jamaica, Laos, Yemen, and Cuba to the country. The largest opposition party calls it human trafficking disguised as a deportation deal. Ukraine is facing renewed internal pressure as President Volodymyr Zelensky's approval of a bill perceived to weaken anti-corruption bodies has sparked large-scale protests across Kyiv and other cities. Demonstrators are calling for a veto of the legislation, which they believe undermines efforts to combat corruption, a key promise that defined Zelensky's rise to power in 2019. These actions have created friction between the president and civil society groups, veterans, and potentially Ukraine's European partners, particularly given the recent vote by Ukrainian lawmakers to diminish the independence of 2 anti-corruption bodies, raising concerns from the EU. Meanwhile, Ukrainian and Russian officials are set to convene in Istanbul for another round of ceasefire negotiations. Turning to the United Kingdom, the government's reduction of its aid budget to 0.3% of national income is expected to have detrimental effects on children's education and increase the likelihood of disease and mortality in certain African nations, as indicated in the government's impact assessment. Eurostar is urging the government to formulate a credible long-term strategy for international rail, expressing concerns that a premature decision by the Office of Rail and Road, or to grant competitors access to existing infrastructure, could hinder its investment and expansion plans. Additionally, ministers are facing growing pressure to assist 40 students in Gaza who received full scholarships to study in the UK but are unable to attend due to bureaucratic obstacles. Tragically, some students have reportedly been killed while awaiting approval, and others remain in constant danger. In Conservative Party news, Kemi Badenoch has recently conducted a reshuffle of her top team, retaining prominent figures such as Robert Jenrick, Mel Stride, and Priti Patel in their respective shadow cabinet positions. Israel's ongoing military operations in Gaza continue to elicit widespread condemnation as the humanitarian situation deteriorates rapidly. The UN Secretary-General has expressed grave concerns that essential aid lifelines are failing, while reports indicate that Israeli strikes have caused further casualties and expanded into new areas. A Gaza hospital reported 21 children have died from starvation in 72 hours. Cardinal Pierbattista Pizzaballa, after a visit to Gaza, criticized Israeli blocs on food and medical shipments. The EU's top diplomat has urged Israel to stop killing Gazans at 8 points. AFP has called on Israel to allow the immediate evacuation of its freelance contributors and their families from Gaza. Ceasefire negotiations are ongoing between Israel and Hamas, potentially involving a pause in fighting and the release of hostages. Steve Witkoff is expected to meet with Israeli Minister of Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer, and a senior Qatari envoy in Rome to discuss Gaza. Greek Orthodox and Catholic leaders condemned Israel's bombardment on Gaza after a rare visit to the territory, July, 18th. A cruise liner carrying Israeli tourists was forced to reroute to Cyprus after being turned away from the Greek island of Syros due to a protest over the Gaza war. Turning to Iran, the theocratic government is leveraging nationalistic sentiment in response to Israeli attacks. The regime is utilizing folklore and patriotic anthems to galvanize public anger and reinforce domestic unity. Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba is under increasing pressure to resign amidst the ruling coalition's recent setbacks and a plummeting cabinet approval rating of below 23%, the lowest since he took office in October. The economic landscape is also turbulent following President Trump's announcement of a trade framework that includes a 15% tariff on imports from Japan, with the U.S. aiming to boost its economy and create jobs by increasing exports of rice and vehicles. Japan, in turn, is expected to invest $550 billion into the United States, and chief tariff negotiator Ryosei Akazawa aims to reach a trade agreement with the U.S. by President Trump's August 1st deadline. Further complicating matters, lawsuits challenging the results of the recent House of Councillors election have been filed across Japan, citing unconstitutional disparities in voting weight and demanding a rerun. The emergence of Sansita, a far-right party advocating an anti-immigration, nationalist platform under the banner Japanese First, has also gained momentum in the parliamentary election. In the corporate world, Japanese companies are reviving the practice of sending new recruits to military-run boot camps to cultivate teamwork, discipline, and fundamental social skills, while a former deputy president of SMBC, Nikko Securities, Inc., was convicted in a Japanese district court for market manipulation related to illegal share purchases. The Philippines has secured a trade agreement with the United States, retaining a 19% tariff on Philippine imports. President Ferdinand Marcos, Jr., celebrated this agreement, announced by U.S. President Donald Trump. The deal also encompasses bolstered military cooperation between the two nations. This occurs as tensions with China continue. Meanwhile, President Marcos Jr. faces domestic criticism concerning his administration's handling of the Trump administration's immigration policies' effects on overseas Filipino workers. Tropical storm Waifa triggered severe flooding across the Philippines. Thousands were displaced, and at least 6 deaths were reported, with 6 individuals still missing. Despite the widespread devastation caused by Typhoon Waifa, one Filipino couple, Jade Rick Verdillo and Jamaica Aguilar, proceeded with their wedding at Barasoain Church in Malolos, Bulacan Province. Demonstrations concerning these various issues occurred outside meetings in Washington, D.C. Australia's Senate saw a Labour motion pass, strongly disapproving of Mehreen Faruqi's actions during a Gaza sign protest. The Australian Press Council ruled that the Daily Telegraph's Labour backs Hamas headline breached press standards due to inaccuracy and heightened community sensitivities. A Victorian parliamentary inquiry heard testimony from former Geelong Revival Centre members alleging their leader protected a Sunday school teacher who later faced imprisonment for child sexual abuse. The Australian government faces a potential obligation to pay Chevron hundreds of millions for oil well cleanup on Barrow Island, as per a 1980s agreement. In sports, Kurtley Beale voiced his support for the First Nations Pacifica team's continued participation in international matches against visiting teams in Australia. Addressing health, Prof. Henry Brodetti of UNSABU is calling for a preventative campaign similar to SLIP, SLAP, SLOP to manage dementia risk factors like diet and anxiety. In the realm of international relations, Australia and the United States are collaborating to bolster Pacific deterrence in response to China's security initiatives, with Pacific Island nations involved in Australia's Talisman Sabre military exercise. Indonesia continues to navigate international trade dynamics with the United States, maintaining established tariff agreement. Domestically, a public health crisis is unfolding in Bali as authorities grapple with a surge in rabies infections, leading to the designation of tourist hotspots as red zones and triggering mass animal vaccination campaigns. In maritime news, a recent deadly ferry fire has exposed deep-seated problems in Indonesia's transport sector, including issues of overcapacity and lax safety enforcement. The incident has renewed demands for comprehensive reform to prevent future tragedies. In an unrelated event, an individual arriving from Bali was apprehended at Auckland International Airport in New Zealand, facing charges related to the alleged smuggling of 20 kg of methamphetamine. The United States has formally withdrawn from UNESCO, the UN's cultural agency, marking the third time in history the nation has exited the organization. An American diplomat told the UNSC that U.S. leadership was key in de-escalating recent tensions between India and Pakistan. Meanwhile, auction houses in the U.S. are drawing criticism for selling prehistoric fossils to private collectors. Contrasting with cultural norms in many Asian countries, co-sleeping with children is relatively uncommon in the United States. Brazil is grappling with legal and economic shifts. The Supreme Court has frozen assets belonging to Eduardo Bolsonaro amid suspicions of using funds from his father, Jair Bolsonaro, to influence the Trump administration. This alleged influence aimed to sidestep potential penalties linked to a coup attempt after the 2022 election. Meanwhile, Great Wall Motor and Bide, Chinese automotive companies, are setting up factories in Brazil. They plan to introduce affordable EVs and hybrid vehicles, contrasting with the reduced operations of Ford and Mercedes-Benz in the country. Syria's probe into the March sectarian violence along its coast concluded that over 1,400 people, mostly civilians, died. The government investigation determined military leaders did not order the killings in the city. Human rights experts are challenging the report, alleging it lacks accountability for the country's security establishment. Transitioning to Turkey, Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has issued a warning to Kurdish and other groups in Syria. He cautioned against pursuing autonomy in the region. Bangladesh mourns after a military training jet crashed into a school in Dhaka. The tragic incident claimed the lives of 32 people, including children, both aboard the jet and on the ground. Widespread protests have erupted, with students and citizens demanding accountability. They are also calling for a halt to Air Force training flights over populated areas. The relocation of military training bases away from densely populated zones is another key demand. The nation observed a day of mourning in the wake of the devastating crash. Mexico is currently facing a challenging wave of gentrification in Mexico City, resulting in the displacement of numerous long-term residents. President Claudia Sheinbaum is actively working with U.S. authorities to facilitate the repatriation of 14 Mexican citizens detained at the Alligator Alcatraz detention center. In economic news, Mexico will impose a $250 visa integrity fee on tourists from the U.S., India, Brazil, and China, potentially affecting millions of visitors annually and adding a new layer to the cost of international travel. Iran's stance remains firm, as its foreign minister declared that Tehran will continue its nuclear enrichment activities. This declaration comes ahead of critical nuclear program talks scheduled with Germany, France, and the UK in Istanbul, signaling a potentially tense negotiation. Shifting focus to China, a notable visit by Mikoho Atari, head of the Mercator Institute for China Studies, NERICS, has taken place. This visit hints at a possible thaw in travel restrictions, especially considering NERICS faced sanctions from Beijing back in 2021. Those sanctions were enacted in response to EU sanctions on Chinese officials, underscoring the complex geopolitical backdrop. Papua New Guinea's highlands have been captured through the lens of a New Zealand photographer, reflecting a journey into the nation's past, beginning nearly 5 decades ago with Victoria Ginn's solo expedition. Turning to New Zealand, the government has introduced laws to govern ground-based space infrastructure. This regulation addresses concerns about potential national security threats from foreign entities. Qatar has officially expressed its interest in hosting the 2036 Olympic and Paralympic Games, with the Qatar Olympic Committee, COSE, actively engaging in discussions with the International Olympic Committee, IOC, about bringing the Games to Doha. A successful bid would mark a historic moment, making Qatar the first nation in the Middle East to host the prestigious event. France is set to see its culture minister Rachida Dati face trial on corruption and abuse of power charges. These charges, dating back to 2019, allege Dati, 59, used her position as a member of the European Parliament, MEP, to lobby for the Renault Nissan car-making group. The accusations arose as Dati prepared to campaign for Paris mayor in upcoming elections. Malaysia's Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim is attempting to alleviate economic pressures. He announced a 100 ringgit payment for all adult citizens. This aims to counter public concern about rising costs and new taxes. In other news, Prime Minister Ibrahim accused Israel's Mossad of targeting Malaysia. He cited Malaysia's pro-Palestinian stance as the reason. Myanmar's junta may have been inadvertently legitimized by a tariff letter from former United States President Donald Trump. Observers suggest this could undermine Washington's policy ahead of the country's elections. This development is viewed as a huge diplomatic gift to the current regime and a risk to existing U.S. strategies. Let's begin with the latest global updates. In Ukraine, intense fighting continues, particularly in the east. Russian forces are focusing their efforts on capturing more territory in the Donbas region. Ukraine is pleading with Western allies for more advanced weaponry and ammunition to defend itself. Millions of Ukrainians remain displaced, both internally and as refugees in neighboring countries. The conflict has significantly impacted Ukraine's economy and infrastructure. Moving to Russia, the economy faces increasing pressure due to international sanctions. The government is working to find alternative markets for its energy exports. Domestically, dissent is being suppressed, and independent media outlets have been largely silenced. There are reports of skilled workers leaving Russia due to the economic and political situation. Across the Atlantic in the United States, the debate over gun control is intensifying following recent mass shootings. President Biden has called on Congress to pass stricter gun laws, but faces significant opposition. Inflation remains a major concern for the U.S. economy, with the Federal Reserve taking steps to try and curb rising prices. The midterm elections are approaching, and both parties are campaigning actively. Turning to China, economic growth is slowing due to COVID-19 lockdowns and global economic headwinds. The government is maintaining its zero-COVID policy, imposing strict measures to contain outbreaks. Tensions with the U.S. remain high over trade, technology, and Taiwan. China is also expanding its military presence in the South China Sea, raising concerns among neighboring countries. In the latest from India, the government is grappling with rising energy prices and food inflation. Efforts are underway to diversify energy sources and boost domestic agricultural production. India is playing an increasingly prominent role on the global stage, seeking to balance its relationships with various major powers. The country is also facing challenges related to air pollution and water scarcity. Focusing on Brazil, preparations are underway for the upcoming presidential election. Current President Bolsonaro is facing a strong challenge from former President Lula da Silva. The election is expected to be closely contested and could have significant implications for Brazil's environmental policies and economic direction. Deforestation in the Amazon rainforest remains a major concern. Shifting to the Middle East, in Iran, negotiations over the nuclear deal are stalled. The country continues to enrich uranium, raising concerns among Western powers. Economic conditions in Iran are challenging, with high inflation and unemployment. Protests have erupted in response to rising prices and government policies. Finally, in Canada, the government is working to address rising housing costs and labor shortages. Efforts are being made to attract skilled immigrants to fill key positions in the economy. Canada is also committed to reducing its greenhouse gas emissions and investing in renewable energy sources. Relations with Indigenous communities remain a priority. Italy has expanded parental rights, as its constitutional court ruled that a non-biological mother in a same-sex union can access paternity leave. This decision offers greater recognition and support for diverse family structures within the country. Greece is currently grappling with a significant forest fire near Corinth, west of Athens, resulting in village evacuations. In a separate incident, a Moldovan oligarch, wanted for a $1 billion bank fraud, was arrested within the country. Turning to Canada, Prime Minister Mark Carney has adjusted expectations regarding a swift trade agreement with the United States. He stressed that Canada would not compromise its principles and accept a deal at any cost. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, a gold mine collapse in the eastern region, controlled by an armed militia, has triggered an emergency rescue operation for trapped miners. The informal mining site was reportedly occupied by thousands of people. The United Nations International Court of Justice is set to release an advisory opinion concerning countries' climate obligation. While non-binding, this opinion will establish a crucial foundation for international legal responsibilities regarding climate change. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, devastating flash floods caused by intense monsoon rains in the northern regions led to the deaths of 3 tourists and left 15 others missing, their vehicles swept away by the powerful waters. Morocco secured a victory over Ghana in a penalty shootout, earning them a place in the Women's Africa Cup of Nations final, where they are set to compete against Nigeria. Regarding Gaza, French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot has urged for the allowance of foreign press access to Gaza. He emphasized the critical need for journalists to have the opportunity to observe and report on the situation firsthand. Zimbabwe experienced a tragic head-on collision between a minibus taxi and a truck, resulting in 17 deaths. The accident occurred after the truck driver lost control and veered into the opposite lane. Slovakia's Prime Minister, Robert Fico, has been using anti-EU rhetoric. Despite his stance, he eventually withdrew his veto on new EU sanctions against Russia after initially resisting for several weeks. Jamaica is facing increased scrutiny over a rise in fatal shootings by the police. Authorities recently killed 5 men suspected of planning a murder. Tonga's Civil Aviation Office has temporarily reinstated Lulutai Airlines' engineering license. Lastly, in Venezuela, Michael Oliveira, a Venezuelan citizen, has returned home after being imprisoned for 4 months in El Salvador. And that's a wrap for today's news, because even headlines need a nap. Stay curious, stay kind, and let the noise fade as you find your quiet. Take care, stay awesome, and I'll see you next time on WHAM Today.